Hello, wherever you are joining us for the September Kubernetes community meeting. My name is Eddie Zaneski, and I will be your host today. I'm a developer advocate over at Amazon Web Services, and I work mostly under SIG CLI. My power went out about 45 minutes ago, so we're running on hopes and wills here. The wonderful Josh is going to take over if I have to bow out for some reason. So without further ado, I want to remind everyone that this call is being recorded. So please don't say anything you don't want publicly on the internet. Also be reminded that we have a code of conduct, so please be excellent to each other. And with that, if you are not speaking, would you kindly mute yourselves? We don't have a note taker yet. May I have a volunteer? Anyone?
Yeah, I can take notes until I have to take over as moderator. So
thank you, Josh. Wonderful. So first up, we have a demo by Jordan Leggett. He's going to show off some really cool, helpful warnings that have landed in the recent release. So please, Jordan, take it away.
All right. Can everybody see my terminal screens?
Yes.
Great. All right. So if you have been using Kubernetes or developing Kubernetes over the past several years, you may have noticed that there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's kind of hard to keep up with it all. And until recently, the only mechanisms we had for communicating information to our users and our developer community was things like release notes or email announcements or Slack announcements, things like that. And those are fine, but our release notes tend to be pretty long, and not everybody reads all 30, 40 pages of them as thoroughly as some of us do. And the people who are consuming Kubernetes releases, Josh said also last week in Kubernetes development, yes, subscribe to that if you don't already, but not everyone who's using Kubernetes or developing for Kubernetes is always reading all of those channels. And so we wanted to come up with a way to communicate information to users at a point where it would be useful and relevant to them. And so as an example, I have here a manifest file that has some API objects. You've probably seen things like this a million times. But you'll notice that these are using v1 beta 1 of the RBAC API. And if I could ask for a show of hands and see them, I would. But quick, show of hands. Who knows whether those are still allowed or deprecated or not? And if they're deprecated, which release they're going to go away in? Probably not very many of you. So what we added in 119 is the ability for the server to return warnings to users. And so if I apply this manifest full of v1 beta 1 objects, starting in 118, you will get warnings like this that tell you super useful things like this API was deprecated in 117, and it is planned to be made unavailable in 122. And what version should you use instead? And the way this is done is via the server sending back headers to the client. So old clients who don't know about those headers aren't affected at all. It doesn't change the status code of the response. It doesn't change the API body of the response. So old clients aren't affected by these, but it lets new clients, kubectl and client Go and other clients who want to pay attention to these, have this information from the server in a compatible way. So that's really great. The way the client intercepts these is done at the client level, like when it's reading the responses from the server. And so it works for any kubectl command. If I do a get of those deprecated APIs, I get the same warnings. If I try to annotate them, I'm writing to those, I get the same warnings. It even works on really, really low level requests where I'm just pointing the client at a raw URL and saying, get the contents of this URL. Because it's at the client level, it still gets those headers back, and those still get output. So this is great. In 119, we're using this to communicate information about deprecated APIs specifically. But in future releases, we can use this same mechanism to communicate warnings about other things like deprecated labels. If you're still using the beta OS and architecture labels to target nodes, those are deprecated. The GA versions have been available for several releases. And so we can start to detect and communicate information about that. We can detect and communicate warnings about problematic configurations. Like if you're creating a pod that requests 4 millibytes of memory because you didn't recognize the lowercase m or the uppercase m was significant, and you're actually requesting an impossible to run amount of memory, we can warn you about that now in a way that is backwards compatible and won't break old clients. So that's the first thing I wanted to show. The second thing is something that's administrator facing. So this is great for communicating warnings to users at the point when they are using the deprecated things. But if I'm responsible for running this cluster, I might not be the one running these kube control commands and being exposed to these warnings. And so it would be really helpful for me as the administrator to know, is this cluster safe to upgrade? Are people still making use of these deprecated things? And so we added metrics to make that information available to the cluster administrator. And so let me run that again so you can see what is happening. So this is just scraping the metrics endpoint from the API server and running it through something to transform that into JSON, and then running a JQ query. So this is the metric that is newly published in 119. And so an administrator could run that and see which deprecated APIs have been requested in this instance and what release they're going to be removed in. And you could even join that information to the metric that gives you details about what types of requests are being made. So if you take that deprecated metric and then join it to the request information metric, you can see details. So you can see, okay, I'm seeing read requests, and there have been 6 requests made to this API, and then a couple writes made to that API. So administrators can use this to recognize when it's safe to upgrade a cluster. If no deprecated APIs that are going to be removed in the next version have been requested, then it's safe to upgrade. And then the last bit is if they detect that requests have been made to these APIs, in the audit logs, there's now an annotation that's added to requests that are made to deprecated APIs. So assume I see someone is writing to this deprecated RBAC API, I can now go look in my audit log and filter it down and actually find the particular client or the particular manifest, so I can contact them and resolve that before I upgrade. So that's what I wanted to show.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan, for the wonderful demo. We have 2 questions. Tim, are these for now or for later?
They could be for later. I don't think they need to be answered now. If you want to answer them quick.
I'll answer them now. The output is to standard error. We already write things to standard error, and standard out is used for writing API output. So the warnings always go to standard error. Kube control does not have an option to silence those. Client Go does. So if you are writing a programmatic client, you can hook in your own handler and intercept those or silence them or do whatever you want with them. Kube control does not have an option to redirect them.
Stellar. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Jeremy, who I think just joined the call. Jeremy Rickard is going to give us an update as the 1.20 release lead.
Hey, everybody. Sorry for the delay in joining. As Eddie just mentioned, I'm going to give you a little brief update on the 120 release. We officially kicked off the release this week. So this is week 1 per the schedule. You can, of course, find that in the SIG release Kubernetes repo under the 120 folder in the releases tree of that kind of directory structure. Some kind of big takeaway dates for this. Enhancements freeze will be the first milestone that's coming up, and that'll be October 6th. After that, we'll have code freeze, which will be week 9. That's November 12th. Thanks, Bob, for dropping the link into the chat here. It's kates.dev/release. KubeCon will come up right after that. So code freeze will happen, and then KubeCon will occur like right after that. So we have a little bit of probably like 2-week period where KubeCon's happening, holidays happen in the US and some other places. So we've pushed the docs deadline out a little bit. Normally these quarterly releases, like 119 was a little different because it was kind of elongated, but normally these releases are quarterly and they last about 12 weeks. This one will be 13 weeks because of that kind of period of KubeCon and holidays. So the docs deadline will be November 30th. And then on December 8th, we will plan tentatively to do the Kubernetes 120 release, with the retro following the week after. One other note, shadow selection is pretty much done. We're making some final, just going through and vetting the choices that the leads have made. We hope to have those announced at the end of this week so that all the shadows that have applied will find out whether they've been selected and will be joining the release team. And then they can start joining the meetings on Monday next week.
Awesome. Thank you for the update, Jeremy, and jumping right into the hot seat. So cheers to you. Up next, we have Mark Rossetti and Michael to give an update on SIG Windows.
All right, let me share my screen for
Thank you, Eddie.
slides. Can everybody see this? All right, do you want to go ahead with the intros, Michael?
Yeah, can you put it on present mode?
I have an ultra wide screen and it tends to skew things.
Okay, yeah, no worries, no worries. All right, hello everybody. It's been a few months since SIG Windows came to provide you guys an update. And we've actually been hard at work. We've been doing a ton of things in SIG Windows to kind of advance the vision of Windows developers and in Kubernetes, and enabling them to build cloud native apps and host them on this wonderful platform that we're all operating on. I'm Michael. I'm one of the co-chairs of SIG Windows. I'm also a director of PM at VMware. With me, I have Mark.
Yeah, hi. I'm an engineer at Microsoft in the Azure org.
And the other technical lead that couldn't make it today due to a conflict is Deep DeBroy. He is an engineering manager at Docker. And if you do a lot of storage work in Windows, you're going to interact a lot with Deep. Next slide, please.
Sure, I'll take this one. So this is a slide focusing on a lot of the work that we've done in Containerd in the last couple of releases. There's been a lot of kind of direction in the Kubernetes community to align with the CRI APIs, and Containerd is the first Windows implementation of that we've got. With it, we're enabling a lot of new user scenarios. A lot of them are, I'll go over some highlights here. Some of the first, the big ones are, there's a lot of new CNI functionality and plugins that are better supported with Containerd. Containerd is a more robust and less monolithic architecture. And also the design and maintenance is completely community driven. Specifically for Windows, there's a number of features that are enabled with Containerd that aren't possible today with Docker that users have been asking for, including the ability to map single files into containers, the support of graceful shutdown and termination grace periods. That one we get a lot of asks around. True namespacing for containers and workloads, and also, like I mentioned, the just a better workflows around CNIs. At the KubeCon EU 2020, there was a talk by Muzz and Michael about a lot of the architectural details around how container runtimes work for Windows, which I've linked here. And if you're interested in that, I encourage you to check that out. Next steps are we're working towards Hyper-V isolated containers, which is a way of supporting secure multi-tenancy for Windows containers, and also GMSA support for enterprise users.
Thank you, Mark. So let's talk a little bit about CSI proxy. So one of the huge advantages of our cloud native ecosystem is that the storage providers and the storage vendors can come in and provide support for enabling containers to utilize advanced storage capabilities. On Windows, this is something that was lagging, and part of it was because of limitations of the platform, and part of it was because we brought Windows late into the ecosystem of Kubernetes. So we've started on an endeavor of enabling CSI for Windows, and the CSI proxy work went to beta with 1.19. It was a tremendous achievement from our team. And essentially the way we did it is that we used a proxy that's running at the host operating system, again, a Windows node here, and that's enabling you to bypass some of the privileged container limitations that Windows has. So the bulk of the work there was in the CSI proxy component, and and essentially you got a native Windows service, as well as a set of V1 Beta 1 APIs that support disk volume, SMB, and file system operations. With the first beta release that's out now, we're supporting Azure Disk and Azure File as the CSI drivers, and GC persistent disk. Now you're going to see there's a couple of huge omissions here, right? How about AWS? How about vSphere? Well, we've just launched work streams, so we can support those CSI providers in the 1.20 release. We're also going to be adding full CI/CD, so we can actually catch issues early on and enable us to fully vet all of these different CSI providers that we support. And the most important thing is that there is work coming up on privileged containers that we're going to talk about later on in this slide. So we're going to try to understand the impact of that to CSI proxy and how can we enable this model to work better with the advancements in Windows that are happening. Next slide, please. On the networking front, so we talked about compute, talked about storage, networking always comes next. A lot of advancements have happened in networking as well. We added support for direct server return that enables you to scale to a large number of services efficiently. We added support for endpoint slices, just like Linux containers code endpoint slices in the last couple of releases. So now you can support services with a large number of endpoints. We've added session affinity, like sticky sessions, destination IP preservation, local routed VIP, dual stack IPv6 support. So you can see as more and more advancements are happening in networking, we want to make sure that the Windows developers get to take advantage of them as well. On the CNI front, you may have noticed the latest announcements from Calico. Now it has an open source release for Windows. Prior to that, it was part of their commercial distribution, the Tigera Essentials package. Now it's open source. And then the Antrea CNI, also that's built on top of OVH, sorry, is built on top of OVS, also has support for Windows, including network policies. So now we have two almost enterprise grade CNIs that are supported on Windows, including network policies. So, lots of advancements there. Like we as a community are super happy for these enhancements. What's next for us on the networking front? We're going to promote DSR to stable. There's some work that we need to do around Q-proxy, local traffic management, including testing with more and more load balancers so we can support them. Next slide, please. I wanted to put the technology matrix out there. We also have documented this in the Kubernetes docs, but we get asked, what's kind of your plan here? And our plan as a SIG is to always support the last long-term servicing channel that Microsoft has, and in this case is Windows Server 2019. So you're going to see that we've been supporting that since 1.14, and then we also want to support the latest two SACs. That stands for semi-annual channel releases of Microsoft. These are the releases that are only supported for a short period of time, usually 18 months, and they are, the commitment from the customers that they're going to keep updating this. Their builds of Windows on a rapid phase to keep with the innovation that's happening in this space. So right now with version 1.19, we're going to support 1909 and 2004. So essentially the last two semi-annual channels. And on the bottom, you're going to see on the container D, when we go GA with Hyper-V, hopefully at 1.20, that's our goal. We're going to support version 1.5 of container D. And again, the same three releases of Windows, 2019, 1909, and 2004. Next slide, please. So what are some of our plans for the upcoming cycles? I'm going to we split this into 3 areas. It could have been 4 if we added networking here, but the compute side, we're going to keep investing in CRI Containerd, and you're going to see the caps there in a second. I want to add a Hyper-V isolation support, GPU support, privileged containers. That's going to bring us closer to parity with Linux and also address some of the key gaps that we have and users or customers have been requesting for us. On the deployment lifecycle management, really huge. We want to get kubeadm to stable. That might be dependent on privileged containers, but we're working on it. We want to start introducing cluster API support. The focus there will start with Azure and vSphere, and then it will move to other cluster API providers as well. But that's something that's near and dear to our heart. We want to enable users to have an easier way to deploy Kubernetes clusters with Windows. And then on the storage front, we want to promote CSI work to stable. We want to have more storage providers. We're going to enable you to do backup recovery with Velero support, with CSI snapshots. That's actually a big thing of CSI. Once you adopt everything to CSI, now you can leverage the advancements that providers have with snapshots, and then Velero can utilize those. And then we're going to also deprecate some of the in-tree storage plugins for Windows that are coming a little bit out of cycle now. Next slide, please.
So,
Mark, it's yours.
Yeah, so we've already kind of alluded to privileged container support for Windows coming up. We wanted to highlight this again here because it could have so many implications across so many different areas of Kubernetes. Our plans are to introduce privileged container support with 120, pending on approval of the KEP and the enhancement. The Windows Container Platform team has a demo video of privileged containers functionality with Containerd today. There's a link to that video to check out. And yeah, privileged containers could have support or enable so many different scenarios, including many cluster API scenarios and network configuration, the CSI plugins, as we alluded to, logging daemons, and just making it easier to manage the Windows server nodes themselves, and many more. Here's a little bit of information about how we wanted to share with other SIGs. So SIG Windows is kind of a cross-cutting SIG. We have, as Michael mentioned, we kind of have our foot in like storage, compute, networking, and everything. We wanted to use this time to kind of reiterate to the community that please, if you are reviewing KEPs or even just code reviews and you think that this could impact Windows, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to take a look, and because we want to maintain Windows support and keep that healthy in the community. There's contact information coming later. And again, we wanted to just highlight the privileged containers and some of the support that we think we're going to need to help land this. Particularly SIG auth and SIG node are probably going to need to help us review and plan some of these changes. We've reached out to both of those communities already in their community meetings, but we wanted to also open up the floor for anybody to bring in scenarios that they could benefit from Windows privileged containers. Here's a quick summary of and links to the KEPs that we currently have working on. We've covered most of these. It's continuing to drive CRI Containerd support to stable, support for Windows privileged containers, cluster API proposal, enhancement proposal for the Windows node support and cluster API, and then kubeadm for Windows. And here's a couple of resources for how folks interested in contributing can help or start contributing. We've got a Slack channel, SIG Windows, where anyone's free to post on. We have weekly community meetings at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time every Tuesday with a full backlog of the recordings available to watch. We have a project board that we're maintaining with issues that people can come pick up, or that's also a good way to raise issues with the SIG if you don't feel comfortable or don't have time to drop a line in the Slack channel. We're looking for PR reviewers and also asking other SIGs that where we need approval from to help us land some of those PRs. You can help by reviewing our E2E test case failures, and even better if you can help troubleshoot some of them. And as I mentioned before, help us either write additional documentation or user stories, and just in general consider what Windows support would look like in your features.
Yeah, essentially, it's not just code that we're looking for. If you can do other things, write docs, review test case failures, come on. We have a lot of work for additional community members to come in and contribute.
Yeah, you want to take this one, Michael?
Yeah, and our last slide, this is how you can find us. We have documentation, we have our Slack channel, a mailing list, we're on GitHub, a YouTube playlist with all the recordings going back 3+ years, and then our community meetings. So you want to know how to find us? We're on Slack, GitHub, and all these things. Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark and Michael, for the update on SIG Windows. I just performed a live migration. My power came back, and I seamlessly transitioned back to plugged-in Wi-Fi, Ethernet, and power. So I'm feeling great. Next up, we have SIG multi-cluster with Jeremy Olmsted Thompson and Paul Morey.
All right, thanks everyone. Let me just share my screen here.
Hey to Tiber, I see you, buddy. Hey everyone.
Hey everyone. All right, so I'm Jeremy Olmsted Thompson. I work on GK at Google. And Paul?
I'm Paul Morey. I work on Kubernetes stuff at Red Hat.
Awesome, and we're the leads for SIG multi-cluster. So let me kind of run you through what we've been working on here. So we'll start with what we did last cycle. I think some of the big things some of you may have seen, we gathered consensus from all of you on what we should actually call the group of clusters that work together that as SIG multi-cluster we are first concerned with, and we've come up with cluster set. So thank you to everyone who participated in our survey, and also thanks to Josh for putting the survey together and getting that out there. We've put together some basic guidelines for multi-cluster deployments, starting with namespace sameness, basically the concept that within this cluster set, a namespace should have a consistent meaning and consistent ownership. Namespace foo shouldn't be used for one thing owned by one group in one cluster and by a completely different group and used for something completely different in another cluster. We've continued to make good progress on kubefed, and we'll kind of talk about that in a minute. And we've taken this multi-cluster service APIs concept to alpha release in a SIGs repo. I've got a link here, and we'll go a little bit more into that in a second as well. So let's talk about what we're doing now. So I think the first thing on our mind is to further define and figure out what we actually want to do with cluster sets. Now that we have this definition, we're starting to have this concept of best practices around that. What does it actually mean to be a part of a cluster set? What does that mean in terms of membership? Do we need to talk about what it means to have a registration API or something like that? And we want to continue to refine the concept of cluster identity. We're also looking at how can we make it easier to actually place work in those clusters, and we've got a little bit more information on that shortly. We've got some new work in kubefed that's interesting, and we're going to be looking at how we can take multi-cluster service APIs from alpha, where they are now, through beta, and then, of course, eventually to GA. So getting into the details of each project here, let's talk about kubefed first. Paul?
I would say the thing that I wanted to highlight is that the folks that are working on kubefed right now are considering how to add poll reconciliation. What does poll reconciliation mean? Good question. I'm glad you asked. So there's two basic models. When we say pull, the other one is push, and push is what kubefed does today. Push means that you have something that is outside the cluster that's being programmed, that is making a client connection to the cluster being programmed and pushing things to it. Pull would mean maybe there is some sort of agent or reconciler running in the cluster being programmed that's watching an API surface external to that cluster, pulling in via watch, pulling in information about what it needs to do within that cluster. And that's the that's the pull reconciliation model that folks working on kubefed are considering now. So I think this is your chance, if you're interested in that, to get involved and affect how that work plays out. I also want to give a shout out to Jimmy, Hector, and others from D2IQ for helping to move the project forward They're doing regular releases in KubeFed, and I just want to say thanks. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. So the next thing, of course, I want to dig into is the multi-cluster service APIs that I mentioned. So we've been working on this KEP for a while as a group. Please check it out. We've got our alpha release up in a SIGS repo. But what's really interesting is kind of what's next. So we've got the base, we've kind of outlined the basis of what a multi-cluster service API actually looks like. And we took the approach of going API first. So this is, we've defined what a consistent experience should look like, but we've left it open for implementations. So we don't have a canonical implementation, and we're actually sourcing a few, and it's awesome. We've seen a lot of community involvement there already. There are actually a couple different implementations in flight, which is great. And so we're looking to kind of grow those as well. But before we can take this to beta, we have to figure out a few things first. So I think the big thing is multi-cluster DNS and what DNS actually looks like for services expanded to the multi-cluster space. We have some basic assumptions outlined in the KEP that we've kind of figured out how do we address headless services, for example, to start. But this needs to be fleshed out and needs a lot more detail, and we need to really solidify what that looks like before we feel comfortable with beta. Network policy is a big piece. What does network policy actually mean when you cross the cluster boundary? We need to figure out how we want that to apply, and how can we practically implement that. Dealing with the fact that there's a whole bunch of native assumptions on local watches on pods, for example. How do we make that sane at the API level across clusters? And then one of the things that's evolved out of looking at DNS in particular for multi-cluster services is the need for a consistent cluster ID. We've discovered certain characteristics that a cluster ID needs to have, like it needs to be a valid DNS label, for example, for MCS in the current form to work. But what else does it need? And what are the other characteristics like uniqueness, things like that? So we're going to continue to kind of refine that over the next few months. And then back to you, Paul, talk about the Work API.
Sure. So what Work API refers to is sort of a different API regime from the one that folks may be familiar with from Federation and KubeFed v2, where the kind of Federation pattern is to have individual resources that correspond to individual resources being programmed in clusters that they're supposed to be scheduled to. I would say it's almost the opposite in certain ways when we think about the Work API. So imagine that we have, call it 3 resources that we want to distribute to some clusters in a cluster set. The Federation type of pattern would be you create some version of those 3 resources as 3 distinct resources in the hosting cluster that KubeFed is deployed in, and each of those individual resources contains scheduling information about where they're supposed to go. So contrast this with Work API, which is about and one thing I'll just mention, when we talk about this, please bear in mind we have not sort of reached the conceptual point where we're talking about scheduling yet. We're at an even more elementary point, I would say, of defining an API that can characterize within a single resource that group of 3 resources in our example. So a work could contain those 3 resources and reflect status information about whether they have been programmed and applied to a particular cluster. You may sense the working backwards pattern being present in this work too. So this is in a stage where we've done some prototyping. There's a link that you can click in the slides that Jeremy is going to share. There's an initial KEP in draft form, and want to shout out to Valerie, Lancy, and Chojin for driving this. Thank you.
Awesome. So what does this mean for all of you? Well, I think the biggest thing is we need your input. So what else should we be thinking about, you know, in this space of a cluster set, and what should our next priorities be? I think a good place to start is thinking about the current projects that you're working on and your SIGs and working groups. What happens to those projects across the cluster boundary? What do we need to be thinking about? What can you think about that might make your project more useful in the multi-cluster space? What have you built that works for you? You know, while working with Kubernetes, you know, you've probably spun up a few clusters before. What have you built that actually links them together? What can you share with us? What should we be thinking about? What can we learn from your experience? And then calling out in particular, I think SIG network, we could really use help to make sure that MCS continues to evolve with cluster local services. And then SIG apps, not listed, but you know, what should we be thinking about with application concepts across cluster boundaries? So how can you give us your input? Well, come to our meetups Tuesdays from 9:30 to 10:20 Pacific. Add your topics to the agenda, reach out on Slack or in the forum. We'd love your feedback. Over the last year, we've had some increasingly interesting conversations. Things have been happening, and we'd love you to be involved. So please come join us. And here's where you can find us. And as Paul said, I'll share this deck out. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy and Paul. Up next, we have the Code of Conduct Committee, and we're going to be hearing from Ava Black.
Hey, folks, let's see if I can share this. Okay, you should all see the slide deck now. So, hey, I think this will be the first Code of Conduct Committee community briefing. Thanks for having me. I'll kind of do a little bit of an intro to us and then go into what we've done and what we're planning on doing. To start with, there are 5 members. We just recently had elections. Tasha and I have been here now for a year, and then Celeste, Karen, and Tim just joined. So give them a welcome. And one of the feedbacks we've gotten a bunch of is folks don't really know what it is we do, or that we're here sometimes. And we put some work into that last cycle, and we're going to be putting more work into that this cycle. So we wanted to start with a bit of a who, what, and why. We are distinct from the steering committee, and we're distinct from Contribex. Both of those we do work with, and yet our focus is much more on providing support and helping to set the culture, helping to ensure the culture is what we all want it to be, and support people when there are conflicts or when folks aren't really sure what to do in a situation. We're here as a resource to help out. And so we focus more on the health and behavior of the community as a whole. And more info on that can be found in some of our GitHub repos. I'll get more into what we're changing there soon, and a whole lot more info in the last KubeCon talk, the readout from Tasha in the last KubeCon, and we have one coming up in the next KubeCon again. So what really do we do, right? We serve when there's some sort of an incident, and that's very subjective. It really can be anything. If you feel like something's wrong or there's conflict and you're having it in your SIG or between SIGs, we're here to help. That's all it is. Doesn't have to be a big thing. We're also here just to provide education or advocacy or support. And sometimes that can take the form of just networking people or talking with them, or even reaching out and getting external support like mentorship and training resources for people. We haven't had very many requests for that, but it has come up. We have a mailing list, and we are all on Slack. Those are the best ways to reach us. And like I said, one of the things we've had a lot of questions of is what happens if you do reach us? And all reports are confidential. Who's reached out to us is confidential. We will try to get back to folks pretty quickly, and we focus on a restorative process, on harm reduction, on providing support to community members, and just making sure everyone feels safe and welcome. Some folks have shared with us that they're like concerned, like, oh gosh, there's a conduct thing, that's bad, right? Really, we try not to do that. And so I'm not going to focus on that because we really avoid that as much as possible. And now for the news of what happened last cycle. Like I said, elections. I want to thank Carolyn and Jason, Jennifer for all the work they did with us last year. And I'm super excited to be working with Celeste and Karen and Tim now. We're working on a model with the LF events team. We sort of tested this at KubeCon San Diego, where we could provide support for their event staff and they could better connect with us, so that it wasn't just LF hosting Kubernetes community. And there had been some communication challenges there between the sort of the staff and the community. And so we're trying to bridge some of that. And in the interest of transparency, we're also working towards having transparency reports. LF does sort of a diversity report at the end of summits. We're working to figure out if there is a model for us and how we could do more of a transparency report around community health and not just community diversity, while also respecting the need for privacy. And so to that end, I wanted to share a little bit of our action last year. We've been called in during some conflict resolution inside some SIGs and between some SIGs. I'm not going to say who, but that's the stuff that we're here to support. And then some things happened, people said the wrong thing on stage or here and there, and we've had to offer some coaching and help provide guidance to folks that, hadn't adapted to the culture, or were coming from different cultures or different countries where the norms are different. And so again, that happens. We are a large, global, incredibly diverse community. It's normal for there to be a little bit of rough edges, and we're here to help smooth that out. So our plans for the upcoming cycle, there's a lot of plans for documentation improvement, making it clear what our internal SLA is. We have one as a team of how fast we will respond if someone does reach out to us. We haven't had enough activity to really need that, but we try. What our report receiving, what our triage procedures are. Again, this is to address the questions that we've received of like, what happens if I do need you? And we want to make that clear and transparent of what the process will be, so that folks can understand, all things I've been saying, that we're just here to support. We want folks to feel comfortable reaching out if they have a concern, that we will handle it fully confidentially. And we're kind of a young committee, so the onboarding and offboarding process itself could use some better documentation. So we're going to work on that. And we're also working on documenting sort of the specific process or the expectations as we work with other groups, steering, Contribex, the events team, Linux Foundation, and their social media team. Right? Kubernetes doesn't just exist at events. We also have Slack. We also have Twitter. Not that that's a bounded space, but it's a very unbounded kind of wild space. And LF Linux runs some of that stuff. And we do work with the GitHub and Slack admins if things happen. Mostly what I see on Slack is like spam stuff, whatever. And how this affects anybody in the community, right? We just want you all to know that we're here to help. You probably won't see our work. That is just the nature of our work, in that we have to respect, and we really want to respect everyone's privacy. So you kind of, in a way, we're here by not seeing the specifics of our work. But if you ever need us, please do reach out. That's the end of my update, and I see a question coming in. Question is, some CNCF projects need guidance on establishing code of conduct committees. Can they reach out to us to help? Absolutely, yes. I just recently found out that there's some work in the CNCF around that, and we'd love to be part of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ava.
Welcome.
Next up, that is the end of the SIG updates. Thank you all for the wonderful updates. I'm looking forward to the future for sure, and all the hard work you've done in the past release and in previous releases. We have a few announcements. The Kubernetes Steering Committee elections are open. If you are an eligible voter, you should have gotten a ballot in your inbox. I have already cast my vote. If you are supposed to be a voter but did not get your ballot, there is a request for a replacement linked right here in the agenda that you may follow to request that. Next update, also, it's very important. We have some steering folks on here. We have some folks running, so it's very important to vote for the future of our steering committee. So take it seriously. Thank you so much. And we have a passcode for Zoom meetings now. That passcode is, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say it out loud, but there's a passcode for all the Zoom meetings. Check the mailing list, check your email, check the agenda. There's a passcode listed there. So please use that for all the future meetings that you can't get into. With that, I'd like to announce our next host. PK on GitHub and Slack is going to be hosting. They are a very, very fond lover of Home Lab, probably more than me, and I love my Home Lab. So we look forward to having PK host next month. If you would like to host yourself, please reach out to George Castro on Slack or SigContribX. They'll let literally anybody do it. They let me on here. So feel free to reach out. It's super easy, and you just do a bunch of cat herding. So it's always great to hear from different folks in the community. We have a bunch of shout outs that I like to call people to. You can check all the ones in the shout out Slack channel. If someone's done something awesome in the community and you want to give them a shout out, pop in that channel, drop a tag in here. I'm not going to read through them all because we have a great list, but you can check the agenda or that Slack channel. With that, we have a tiny bit of time left. Are there any open announcements people would like to share or open updates for discussion? Going once. Cool.
Someone says you should read the shoutouts.
I will start reading the shoutouts. Thank you, Paris. Let's see. I'm terrible at pronouncing names. The first shout out is from @SRAGHUNATHAN. Shout out to @Karen B for her support with 119 Kubernetes website release process so far. She is dependable and goes an extra mile to help and constantly on the lookout for improvement. Thank you for the help, Karen B. Liggett would like to shout out Night42 for tireless work on tracking down and fixing test flakes and real bugs the flakes were trying to alert us about. Thank you, Night42. AOJEA, big shout out to Liggett for not only doing his work, but for sharing knowledge and expertise. If you have not seen this, Jordan did a great video on how to track down flakes. He shared a gist of it. I believe it's linked in the announcements in the SIG testing channel, but go read the gist and watch the video. It's really great, and we can start tracking down some of those flakes. Inductor would like to shout out KKKTS and OKE-PY for creating good first issues in Japanese localization. Very important. SpiffXP, big shout out to AOJEA, who helped track down DNS as the culprit for a recent Kubernetes CI issue. Lori Apple would like to shout out XMUDRI, Marcos, for driving efforts to firm up the roles and responsibilities for our release manager associates. Jeremy Rickard would like to thank the Kubernetes 119 retro that's been happening. And shout out to Lori Apple for digging into previous retro to-do items and prioritizing things that have fallen by the wayside and helping to make releases better going forward. SF Tim would like to shout out Zachary Sarah for a wealth of positive, valuable contributions to SIG docs. E. Hashman would like to shout out Jay Vans for this excellent first PR. E. Hashman helped backport the fix to 117.119, cross-checking this against the production clusters that they support. I discovered this bug is producing a full 2% of our production logs. So the fix saved on a lot of wasted production log space. D. Holbach would like to thank Somo Tachiyama. They have done great work in their Google Summer of Code internship this year. Check out the write-up in the blog post on that. Sam Tochiyama would like to shout out their awesome mentors through the Google Summer of Code internship. Justin B, StealthyBox, and the hashtag Cluster Add-ons channel community. They were really amazing. those are all the shout outs. I'm sorry if I butchered names, but keep them coming for the next meeting. Shout out your fellow community members, and thanks everyone for joining us for this update. If there's nothing I'm forgetting, and if there's nothing else, I think we can call it and sign off and have a extra 8 minutes back.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry I joined late, first of all.
Sure.
So hi everyone. I'm kind of like new and all. I did some contribution to Kubernetes, and I'm back after a long pause. And I don't know what's the correct place to make my contribution now. I found it like kind of like a small usability issue, and before I open a bug and have like thousands of discussions, I thought it might be easier to just maybe find a sponsor for that. So I don't know, is this the right place to look for a sponsor, or for the PR?
Anyone from SIG UX around? SIG Usability around? By any chance? Ping me on Slack. I can help you get started.
Okay.
I am Castro Jo, and I'll chat you the information. But yeah, I can help out here.
Yeah. Okay. I'll join Slack and I'll ping you there. Okay. Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Cool. Nothing else. Everyone have a great Thursday and a great weekend.
Bye.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
Bye.